how can we manipulate that program to identify what their actual needs are versus what they have to have? And the only way to do that is connection.
To oversimplify that and how you get there, ask good questions and be a good listener. We don't know what their goal is, what they would like an outcome to look like.
Hello, my name is Jason Reichl, and you're listening to Risk Management Brick by Brick. I'm fascinated with people who are helping build and maintain the physical world around us. On each episode of this podcast, we'll dive in with a risk manager, speak to them about how technology plays a role in this process.
Hello, Sarah. Hello, TJ. Thank you for joining Brick by Brick. I'm so excited to be talking to you today about the vendor experience, how to manage vendors, how to manage client relationships, the relationship between two people within the industry who work in a large company and how that works. I'm just very interested in diving into all things relationship. Sarah, why don't you start us off and give us an introduction to you?
Yeah. Hi, Jason. Thanks for having us. Let's see. I've been in the insurance industry now for approximately 30 years, and my journey started with a political science degree and a really weak job market. And what essentially happened was I needed a job that didn't involve waitressing. So I looked at different options, one of which was working for an insurance agency in my small town during the summertime, filing and that sort of thing. So I took out the phone book and I just set up meetings, old school with a resume and going out and meeting with agents. And so that led me to, starting in the insurance industry, essentially. But how I got to where the niche that we're in now was just good luck, just meeting the right people. And so that's where I've stayed in the high net worth field now for approximately 30 years.
Great. And I can't wait to dive into what that all means to everyone that's listening. TJ, let's get here a little bit about your story.
Hey, Jason. So happy to be here. TJ Reardon from Hub Private Client. I'm a private client advisor on our team in New England. I just kind of fell into the insurance world. Yes, technically, I've been doing this 12 years, maybe 15, depending on if you count an internship. 4 years in the private client property and casualty space, and then 8-ish years as a life insurance broker.
I also started my very first job out of high school, like the summer between high school and never shared this story on the podcast, but the summer between high school and college, and I'm going to date myself here, is 2001, right? And I go into, hey, maybe I'll get a job in the insurance industry. That sounds interesting. So I got a job selling life insurance during 2001, which was a real experience in itself. And I was doing all the calling, going out and seeing people, and went as far as getting my license until I realized that I wanted to do more technology-based stuff and went to school for technology. So also very old school. I was calling people and then actually showing up at their house and working through life insurance with them. So very different world, but also just understand that sort of old school way of doing things. One thing I want to kind of just set up, which is, you guys both work at Hub. Hub is known in the industry, but why don't we dive into your job from a day-to-day perspective so the audience can kind of understand the kind of people you're dealing with, the kind of work you're doing, and what that entails, because private client may not be an obvious title to everyone listening to the podcast.
I guess I'll start. So when I think back, I'll go into historically how I got here a little bit. For those of us listening, of course, there's the commercial lines and personal lines, and I was in a commercial lines field for all of about 8 months, and it was not something that I felt comfortable with. I don't know anything about buildings and construction equipment or anything like that. So I started in personal lines, and then when I relocated to Boston, I was at a larger firm. I had the good fortune of knowing somebody who knew somebody else. And that was my first introduction to a large firm that was doing high net worth before a lot of other brokers were successful at it. And so I got a really good education. But what I also realized was, okay, the middle market segment of insurance is certainly a lot more transactional. But when you get into the high net worth space, there is a lot more relationship building that occurs, and it's not just as tedious as maybe changing policies and talking about a $5 premium increase. There was a lot more involved to a degree that was really fascinating and interesting. And I may not ever be able to live in that lifestyle, but I could live vicariously through them. And also, they are people are more willing to have relationships, and that was crucial to me. I can't sit just behind a desk and not talk to anybody. So that's what I like about a high net worth space, because we are still dealing with an interaction, a relationship, more so than you would if you called a Geico or Progressive.
Yeah, right. TJ, what's talk to me about private client and what the high net worth sort of relationship looks like and what happens from a day-to-day perspective, because a lot of the people listening are at companies or are part of commercial lines, but insurance is this big broad thing. There's lots of it going around in the world, and Hub has their part in all of that. So what is kind of your day-to-day look like, and what kind of relationships are you managing?
It is. And I think, for a very long time, our space was kind of overlooked because of how complex the commercial world is and what the market has turned into, right? Personal lines and someone's personal balance sheet. They didn't really think that much about it, right? Yeah. It wasn't hard to get insurance in a lot of these places. We certainly weren't in the same litigious environment we're in now. So people didn't have to worry about that. But our clients basically, they have complex personal balance sheets.
Yeah.
And sometimes that just means a lot of wealth. Other times it means houses across the country or the world, domestic employees, large art collections, yachts, all of that fun stuff.
Well, one thing that people will think about right away when we talk about high net individuals is you guys must be good at managing the relationship, the client experience of managing that, right? That seems to be in everyone's mind. If you're dealing with high net people who have complex situations, who maybe onto themselves, they are their own business entity, right? Just by all the things that they have going on. What kind of key components do you break down your client management strategy into? Like how should someone look at that? And sort of what are some of the tricks that you use to ensure that you do have that good relationship? Because it's easy to say relationship. Everyone says insurance is a relationship business. And one of the things that I've tried to do on this podcast is quantify what that actually means, right? Because it is a relationship business. I understand that. But obviously, everyone doesn't have the same kinds of relationships, right? So there has to be some quantification of what that word means. And that's one of the things that I'm trying to dive into while we explore the relationship of vendor management and client management, and kind of talking through both from the broker's perspective and the company's perspective, or individuals in this case with the high net worth individuals. What is that relationship look like? How do you manage that complex relationship?
It's interesting because I've been in the field since before we had all of the technology that we have today. We had dial-up laptops, and, we had landline phones and all of these things. And the expectation was always still, we were less about email, less about faxes, and more about phones. And I think we have that's a number one for me, especially for people that of different generations. I have two in a Gen Z relationship, and so we're not talking to each other as much. And in this particular industry, you have to you have to have conversations, because that's how you find out that so-and-so's son is getting married. And then what does that look like? And, oh, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? Let me get you, and in really getting a sense of who they are individually, but also what their risk management philosophy is, which is different for every single person. They have they have funds and unlimited funds, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they want to spend all their money on X, Y, and Z. And how do they feel? It's a feeling too. And how can I not cookie cutter approach to the insurance? I mean, insurance is pretty black and white in most cases, but how can we manipulate that program to identify what their actual needs are versus what they have to have? And the only way to do that is connection. And whether it is you physically go to their house, which I have done, or have wine and cheese event, or if they like art, inviting them to art exhibit, something like that. You really have to think outside the box. And it sounds simple. It's just, I'm not trying to simplify it by saying you have to have a phone call, but you do. Emails just don't cut it. Texts just don't cut it. We still have to connect. And the only way to do that is verbally, really. I'll give you a situation I just ran into. It was a couple of weeks ago, and I had a client. He was down in Florida, and he just, randomly decided, just like, he said, I'm thinking of buying a property in Florida. So of course, everybody groans, and I sort of just go over the idea. Okay, well, this is what you need to look for. And while he was on the phone with me, his wife walked into the room, and he said to her, oh, I'm on the phone with Sarah. Now, that means to me that I'm a part of their family, essentially. His wife knows who I am. And so I feel great about that. That makes me feel like I have done my job. I've done my due diligence. It's not a transactional thing. I am in it for,
You're part of their conversation at the dinner table.
That's right.
That's deep relationship. TJ, what about you? What are you thinking?
And I was just going to say, to oversimplify that and how you get there, ask good questions and be a good listener, right? I think our industry, in the personal line space especially, there's a habit of getting deck pages, providing a quote, and telling me you have something better.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, we're talking to people, we don't know what their goal is, what they would like an outcome to look like, what their intended use of insurance is, right?
I like that. I want to double click on something that you talked about. So we're trying to define the relationship, and then you also brought up a term in the insurance industry that everyone uses, or a similar thing, which is risk appetite, right? Or risk philosophy, risk management philosophy. I think you said, Sarah. TJ, how do you gauge in this environment that you're in someone's risk appetite, the kind of risks that they're willing to take? How's that conversation look? And is it a series of conversations where you build this profile up of the person over time? Or is it a very specific sort of tactical thing you do in the beginning of that relationship to set the stage for what their risk appetite would be or what their risk philosophy is?
I think a big part of it, you start at the very beginning, right? We have a pretty in-depth discovery process to get to know our clients from the first call. And then it's really learning it over time, right? And again, every client's different. We had some who are like, hey, I just paid for this out of pocket anyway. You're right. That makes no sense that my insurance would have responded to that accident. Right? Yeah. My 17-year-old bumped the car into a pole. It's $8,000 to repair. I paid it out of pocket. And then you have other ones who clients can be standoffish. They're very private people, and it might take 6 months, a year, 2 years to truly get to know them and what's right for them.
That makes sense. Let's talk about two things that were also spoken about that, which I love the idea that insurance is black and white, but their needs are bespoke, right? So I love that sort of analogy that Sarah made about what your job is, which is really to translate that bespoke need to something that is, bonded, is an insurance thing, right? How does that work? How does that translation work for you? And how does it work in such a large organization as Hub to understand both your product portfolios, but also how to get them? Is it a whole team behind the scenes that are helping do that? And if you imagine that you were starting over, what are some of the tips on how to make that translation, how to understand their real need? Because I feel like that's another point where, again, the thing that I love about having people like you guys on the show is you can talk to any broker and they'll say sort of the same things, but what that means to each one is very different, right? And that's sort of what I like to try to get the listeners to understand is these are the kinds of things you should be asking. You should be asking, hey, how do you take what I need and translate that to something like black and white, like insurance? Like, what's your philosophy there? How do we build this relationship, right? Both on the client side, what the client expectation should be, and then also on the servicing side, which is, where I look at you guys doing is servicing that client. How does that translation process work? And how do you ensure that you are breaking down their needs, in the more complex situations?
I think I do think initially that can be a little bit of a nuanced conversation because you're still kind of trying to feel each other out a little bit, but and especially as I've gotten more confident in my role, I can I can say, if all things being equal, if you had, water damage, say, from a roof leak, and the cost is going to be $20,000, would you think to call me? If the answer is no, then my assumption is that you're looking at this bigger picture. You're not looking at as a maintenance contract or maintenance policy. You're looking at it because you, the insured, is looking at big picture catastrophic loss situation. So that gives me the sort of flexibility to say, okay, well, if you're looking at it like that, how can I use what I have? And we're, guided by whatever the companies, offer. And there are, each state has requirements and the carriers have to offer certain things. So we're stuck with that. But outside of that, how can we make that program a little bit more tolerable for a client? Really, because it's a necessary evil. They have to buy it. They know they have to have it. It stinks. A lot of times if they have a mortgage, well, those are parameters that we can't, get around to too much. But if you get into their head a little bit and you ask those types of questions, like, if this were to happen, would you give me a call? That kind of answers the philosophy. What do you expect out of this program?
TJ, what about feeling management? What suggestions do you have for sometimes you're talking about insurance on things that are not pleasant conversations for people. I'm sure of that, right? So how do you manage the feeling management piece of this with clients or even vendor? If we want to open up this to vendors, but I'm very interested in some of the things that you guys put out there, really double clicking on and diving into. So what are your tips around feeling management, if we can call it that?
Feeling management. Oh boy, sending me to therapy. I don't know. I think it's empathy, right? And kind of the understanding of what our role is, and that your broker should be your advocate, right? Like, we're on your side. We don't enjoy delivering a bad message. Yeah. And trust me, if they gave me the keys to provide the solutions we're allowed to provide, the insurance world would look a lot different.
When I'm talking to some of my, individual friends in Silicon Valley who have high net worth, one of the things that they often talk about is that feeling management piece is so critical to them. They do not live in the insurance world, right? And the insurance world is a lot of ones, and then if this happens, then it's a 2, and if this not, then it's a 3, and that world can be very intimidating and cause a lot of emotional distress, especially people who are usually more controlling or successful. They have a need to want to control these things, and it's a world that they don't know. And I find that different approaches here matter, and I like the empathy approach. Is that something that's just earned over time, or is there something that you do, TJ, to demonstrate that empathy very early on in the relationship that you feel has been a key part of your success?
I think that's earned. I think it's part of the personal connection you build with clients. I also think it comes from providing transparency.
Oh, I love that.
In the marketplace, right? And it's not sticking something in front of the client and saying, this is the best thing. do this. It's here are your options given what you're trying to accomplish.
This
is why
reminds
we
me
suggest
of
this
two
route.
frameworks. The first one is what Sarah's talking about, which is a waterline framework used in the Navy, which is what's your waterline? And Sarah, you said something very interesting to me, which is, would you think to call me in this situation? So that sort of sets up the waterline for you of decisions that are above that they're making every day that they don't feel like you need to be part of. Now, obviously, if you feel like you need to be part of that, that's probably the part of the engagement where you try to show them how that stuff is actually dangerous and to the hull of the ship, right? And then everything below that becomes sort of where your conversation lies. And I'm guessing over time that waterline can shift up or down depending on the relationship. I also like the idea of this of transparency. And, one thing that I want to talk about is the artifacts of that. How do you manage a relationship through documentation and through artifact creation? Is that a big part of how you guys manage your relationships internal to Hub and internal to yourself? Is there a lot of documentation that is happening on these relationships, on the conversations that you're having? How do you keep all of that straight? It just seems like something that's difficult to do.
Well, thankfully, throughout the years that there's always an agency management system, essentially. So, and I think there's two big ones. One, it primarily is just kind of most agencies use. So that is the gold standard for keeping every file. So there's no paper anymore. It's just all electronic. And so there's ways to back to the whole email. Yes. Well, we have to make phone calls, and that's the touchy-feely part of it. Then the meat of the account is a lot via email. And so all of those email conversations get filed electronically. And honestly, we have accounts in our office that go back to 2009. And so essentially we could pull all that documentation if we needed to back to 2009. And we do internal audits as well. So audits done, by our peers and by management to, tag a couple of accounts and just see what's in there. We have, things that we have to, certain rules and regulations that we have to abide by, and signatures and things we need to get signed, and all of that. All of that is kept on the agency management system.
Does that agency management system, and in the industry, there's, again, like you said, just a few, but is that sufficient to actually managing these relationships, or is that just managing all the insurance elements of that relationship? Is there relationship management that you have to do outside of that organization that you have to do to keep these relationships strong?
Yeah, I mean, as part of that, if this is what we're thinking about, in addition to that, we also do a connection with the client on an annual basis. So we have an annual review process as well outside. So that would be the external piece of it. And so that client sees, on a 11-page document or whatever the size of their account is, this is the picture of my account. This is what I have. And these are some other options that I might need to consider. And through that conversation every year, if you haven't talked to them all year, you can parse out that there's new trips, or there's new drivers, or there's new family members, or whatever that case may be. That's outside of that, that other piece, which is the agency management system. But we have an annual review process that we adhere to.
TJ, one question I have for you is, in a lot of ways, the way that it sounds like you guys are set up in with your clients, you're sort of operating their risk portfolio for them, and you are making sure that they have the right insurance. That also must mean dealing with vendors and other things. How do you suggest you manage a vendor on behalf of a client that allows you to, and maybe it is that you don't, I don't know the answer here, but that you manage a vendor on behalf of a client, knowing that what that vendor does could very well impact your relationship with the client, right? And so, this is one of the big broker questions in the room, which is, how do I allow vendors into the customer experience and maintain the relationship while also making sure that the work is done well, and that, if I bring someone in, that the work is reflective of our relationship as well. Now, what are some suggestions that you have around how to manage that appropriately? And I think it's probably going to go back to this transparency angle, but I want to understand how you actually manage that from a transparent perspective.
I think for me, it's also leaning on both my own internal and external kind of peers and colleagues. Like when a client needs something that doesn't, and I guess this goes back to which type of vendor, but I didn't think of, there's stuff we don't do as Hub.
Yeah.
Right. It could be an appraisal, moving and storage, something along those lines that a client needs. And it's, okay, who do I know either directly in that space, or who do I know that knows someone in that space and probably deals with them frequently?
Yeah. Amazing. Yeah, it's so fascinating. I think there's I really love that we're having a personal high net worth conversation. But to be honest, for our commercial listening clients, I think that, and I've done this in B2B SaaS, which is I always look to B2C trends, right? I look to B2C trends to figure out what B2B is, because people buy products and people buy from businesses. It's the same person, yet those two industries tend to look at differently. In the personal lines business, people are buying that, but those people are also buying commercial lines insurance for the jobs that they work at too. So I always find that some of the emerging ways to think about the relationship or think about how to manage this is coming from more of the personal or the commercial in B2C, like B2C things. A lot of the trends are there. What are some of the trends that you guys are seeing that are really taking hold with your clients, or the things that you guys are thinking about as Hub or with your own individual, book of business?
Well, I'll jump in because I think TJ and I are very interested in the world of AI and your most recent podcast, Jason, was really interesting because there, how do you adjust to the world of AI, but at the same time having that connection with a client and that relationship? I think two things can happen at the same time. I think the AI piece is going to make our ability to have, more meaningful relationships with the clients. It's going to make that easier because a lot of the other, transactional work or research that we might have to do can be done by AI. And part of me is a little scared about AI because it reminds me of, using like some sort of, when I was writing research papers, and you go to the library and you get one of those little books. It's like a little cheat book on how to write the paper. I feel like that a little bit with AI, but I've also used it on my own, and it is remarkable. And so I think we're getting to a place now that both things could really be compatible.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Yeah. The AI, the outcome-based AI, built on managing relationships, built on understanding nuance on these things, is really, really interesting to our industry, right? To insurance, to what it means. I also think one of the interesting things about AI that I've talked a lot about with some more on like the raters and people who actually place rates with insurance carriers is the entire business is built on an actuary model looking at the past. But now we're getting closer and closer to real-time availability of information. And what's that going to do for things like personal lines and regionalization, and down to the city level, down to things that, if you're talking to an accountant, they would have loved to do, but decided it wasn't worth the effort, right? And so now I think what the future of what we sell and how it is so bespoke is going to look different. TJ, what are some trends that you're kind of keeping out of eye for? And if it's AI, it's fine to talk about. I think it's on everybody's mind. But are there other things that you're interested in as well going on right now?
I think what we're keeping an eye on is who's going to provide creative solutions to have a property market crisis.
Yeah, that's definitely on everyone's mind when things are so up in the air with lots of different things. Again, I think it's about that data being closer to real time to get those creative solutions into market. What's some innovative product that you guys have released for your customers in the last, let's say 24 months? What's things that have come to fruition for you guys?
I mean, we have a Wildfire
right
program.
Yeah.
So I think you getting back to the what people want, and what their waterline is, that's the waterline. That's what, when I'm providing insurance quotes for a renewal, especially, we'll just use Florida because that's on everybody's mind. And it's like every time they have to hold their nose and pay the premium. But they really truly just want to insure for certain things. They want to
Yes.
be able to insure the fire loss. They want a lot of this that was built into these insurance
Bundled
programs.
packages. Yeah.
Yes, and because of the insurance companies that were catering to the affluent, there was a lot of great bells and whistles that were tapped in, right? But I think what we're seeing now is, well, they probably wouldn't put the claim in anyways. So are they really going to use that? And then how can I, Mr. Whomever, I just want to buy X, Y, and Z. That's all I want to pay for. I don't want to pay for this. I'm not going to use that. So I think we're going to have to reevaluate what that insurance package policy looks like. And that's going to be a challenge. But I think that's the innovation that we're going to have to look for.
Absolutely. Yeah, I definitely think that's on the horizon. TJ?
I was just to say, we'd seen it already where our world is now looking more and more like the commercial world.
Yeah.
Complex personal risk, where you define towers of insurance. You can have it rated by different perils and pick out which perils you want covered.
Yeah.
And it's going to come down to, the question's coming up more and more, do I even bother insuring this property, right? Which where rates have gone as financing becomes more expensive.
Do you think that and we talked about creative solutions, do you view it as the job of the insurance companies to get creative and update how they go to market with what things are available? Is that pressure and conversations that, as Hub or as yourself, that you're having behind closed doors with, your counterparts on the insurance side? Is that something that everyone's kind of waking up to? Is it that the future is going to be that we're going to have homes, and just using personalized, not even commercial, but homes that are completely not insured, and people are, going to look at other ways of, maybe building those with materials that can be destroyed and then rebuilt quickly. When we talk about these creative situations, how do we build the infrastructure within our industry to push these on behalf of our clients? Because that seems to be where, the hang up is, or how we can maneuver that. Is that conversations that are happening behind closed doors that you guys are having together? How do we actually make those changes? How do we actually see creative solutions get into the marketplace?
I think they're conversations that are mutual between brokers and the insurance companies, providing their perspective, right? Because at the end of the day, for a lot of these companies, we're their boots on the ground.
Yeah.
And we're the ones who are actually talking to the consumer.
You have all the context of the actual relationships and kind of getting at the forefront of what customers are asking for.
Right.
Yeah. Sarah, did you have something to add about that?
Well, we're still dealing with kind of a two-tiered layered system here, because I personally am in the category that I can't a la carte my coverage because I need all of it. And, I would be financially ruined if I couldn't insure my house.
Right.
But the people that have the means that, can pick and choose would prefer to pick and choose. And yes, I would say that there are conversations that are being had looking to the future of what does this look like, both because of the higher catastrophic losses that they've had, right? So insurance companies can't sustain that year after year after year. And how do we serve the client and serve ourselves in that capacity? And I think, developing a different view of what the insurance piece should be is going to be beneficial for both sides.
Yeah, looking at more portfolio roll-ups or other things that allow insurance to be placed on, say, some place in Florida because there's enough across the whole portfolio that makes that still tangibly enticing to the insurance company, as an example. These kind of things we're talking about, these bundles. At the same time as everybody wants to separate them, right, into individual what they have. So I think that is the complexity we sit with now, which is there's two ways we go with this. We look at the bigger picture, or we look at the micro picture. And I think that you probably are getting it from all sides, obviously, depending on how people look at their risk philosophy or appetite.
Yeah, and I think the toughest question to answer when it comes to these types of creative solutions is, if it really is going to be fixed on a broad scale, how quickly are states going to move to allow?
Yeah, right. That's yeah. It is an interesting time, and we're seeing the ramifications as this stuff happen year after year after year after year, and pretty soon this is just going to be baked into the historical data. So, hopefully we get someplace with this. I like to end the podcast with one last question around advice you would give to someone entering the industry or someone that is in a position trying to move around in it. Any things that come to mind when I say that to you guys?
Oh, this is going to sound trite or generic, but it has done wonders for me. And that is just collecting a network of people around you. When I say collecting, I mean, it doesn't, you treat the person on the other end of the phone, on this in service the same way you would treat your boss. I think I have had the very, very good fortune of casting a wide net and having a really wide net of people. So if I get into trouble and I need help with something, I know who to call. It's the same philosophy with having a relationship with your clients. It's absolutely no different. But having a network within your network of people, we're all in it together, and one can't function without the other. So you just have to build that network. And again, I've just been very fortunate.
I think that's not trite advice. Sometimes some of the advice that we give to young people, network is important. It's not about networking. Networking is the action to get to the network.
That's
but
right.
The point is to build the network. It's not just to meet people casually at the bar at a conference and then, mess off and never talk to them again. It's about actually building that relationship. So I think, you focus so hard on the action when you're starting to build your career, not on what the outcome you're after is. So I think that's a beautiful way to articulate that. TJ, what about you?
Well, before Hub, I'd only worked for kind of smaller regional companies, which I worked with great people. I had great mentors at them. But if I could go back and start all over again, I would have worked for a big company first. And I would have been involved in some type of training program, whether that's underwriting or whatever, right off the jump to get kind of a broad level technical expertise.
Yes.
And again, going back to networking, like, I'm going to sound older than I am, but pick somewhere where you can go into an office.
Yeah.
Those training people, right? You go to happy hour after work.
Oh, you have to. Like, that's
whatever, right?
Old school. Yeah.
I'm always jealous of the people who are like, oh yeah, we started at XYZ together in this program for 2 years.
Yeah.
And
right.
25 years later, they're still connected.
Yeah, I think that what I love about you, and I talk about a lot about this on technology podcasts, which is we're in the age of generalists now, where broad exposure is critically important. With AI and other tools coming up that can go deep, it's more important than ever that you have a wide set of skills. And when you typically go to a smaller organization and those kind of things, what you get is a very specific skill set because you're filling a gap on a smaller team. Where when you go into a bigger organization, I think you get this broader experience that can be fundamental to building the network, as Sarah said, and also really giving you a holistic approach to the work. Because, let's be honest, I know you guys have very important jobs at Hub, but they're not hiring people for gaps. They're hiring people to do a broad service for their customer, right? For your insured or for the commercial business or whatever. So you get a very different experience than if you're going into a very small organization. So I think both of those are incredibly tangible to the audience. So thank you for sharing them. We'll get that back.
I was just going to put a book plug in. I don't see it behind you, but have you read the book Range?
I have. Yes, I love Range.
Yeah.
Range is a great book.
Exactly. Yeah.
A lot of my philosophies on journalism comes from there. He was writing a book at the same time as I was writing a book, and so when it came out, I was like, "Well, I have to rethink a lot of things." So we'll see. Love that book. I think that we're in an age of orchestration. I think the fundamental question at the heart of technology, insurance, and what you guys do is this idea that what's not going to be taken over by technology is the relationship. And we need to define what a good relationship looks like by talking to people who can manage good relationships. It's a very hard thing to do, right? It's a very hard thing to quantify what's good client management, what's good vendor management, what's good these things, because you can't just measure it on never having a claim or never having an issue, or you can't measure it on only when you have issues. So it's just a very complex conversation. And I really appreciate you two coming in and sharing your advice and sharing a little bit about your landscape. I appreciate
thanks,
you guys.
Jason.
Thank
It
you
was
very
great.
much.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye,
Great
you
talking
two.
with you.
Bye.
Take care.
Risk Management Brick by Brick is brought to you by TrustLayer. Find out how TrustLayer manages risk so that the people can build the physical world around us. Head over to TrustLayer.io. And then make sure to subscribe to Risk Management Brick by Brick on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. On behalf of the TrustLayer team, thank you for listening.